there are too many people in the cart today in this country and not enough people pulling it. Roughly 50% of our population is a net recipient of something. That is unsustainable and historically unheard of. Again, we're killing the goose. You guys are the goose. If we don't get that, if we don't reinforce the entrepreneurial spirit in this country, we run the risk of lowering our standard of living, being uncompetitive in the world. And I'll tell you one other thing I believe to my core, and that is, as your educational system goes, so goes your country. And we are way down the list. We are, I think, 11 or 13 out of 39 developed nations today in terms of college graduation, college degrees. That's a big mistake. We need to emphasize value-added education, engineering and science, and math, and all of those things that allow us to be more competitive. Because we're never going to keep our standard of living up if we don't make more value-added products. The things that Bill Gates and Steve Jobs and Oracle do. So that's the fundamental belief system I have. I believe in hard work. I believe in accountability. And I believe in sympathy and empathy. But I believe that also the proper display of that is through self-reliance and an expectation that you are the recipient of the life you build, and that moral consequences matter. And for those of you who are bankers here, and there's a couple, the fundamental keystone of banking is moral consequences. And we have a government today that said to us that if you make a mistake, somehow the government's the backstop for that you and I are paying for our neighbors' mistakes. There's a certain amount of that that's appropriate, but I don't believe at the level we're seeing now is at all appropriate, that good judgment and failure make good judgment. That, do you know what I mean? One reinforces the other, and if you take consequences out of the equation, you actually cause more problems than you fix. I know that I have three nominations, and Betsy here's chair of the Republican Party, and she does a great job. And I also have the conservative endorsement and the independent endorsement. But I'll be frank with you, I look at the Democratic and the Republican Party as two parties at war with themselves, and we're left out of the equation, as I said. And that I think both parties have it wrong, that the Democrats want bigger and larger, more expansive programs, and the Republicans talk incessantly about tax cuts. The truth is, if you don't address spending, you're only feeding the disease that's eating us all alive. And you see that particularly living in New York State. So that's the kind of the theme of my candidacy. I'm one of the lucky ones. I can do this because I don't have to work, which I'm not ashamed of. My wife and I do something that apparently government doesn't know how to do, and that's live within our means. And so I'm sticking my neck out. I understand there's negative ads running about me today. And that's unfortunate, but those are the things you have to accept if you do what I'm doing. You don't have to like it. But we had the closest race in the United States last time. I didn't tell you that, but when I decided to run, that's to tell you, I was probably the latest candidate to announce. I gave myself 5.5 months. I mean, I built worked on entire malls that got built in 6 months. I thought I'd be able to run for Congress in 5.5. I was absolutely wrong. We were outspent by $600,000 or $700,000 by a guy who's run many times, has lived in government his entire life, and we had the closest race in the whole United States. So my wife calls me the #1 loser in the country. But I don't think we have to lose this time. You can always lose. You don't want to. I don't go around saying we're going to win. I think we can. And I think it's important that people like us get in government, get involved. Not because we have all the answers, but because we understand the problems, and we understand how value is created, and we know what built our lives, and we understand innately that government, well, it may not be our enemy, is not necessarily our friend, and that it shouldn't always be about the growth of government. At some point, they have to realize that we have our limits, and we have a stimulus package that an $816 billion stimulus package that had $90 billion that you could actually say went to create jobs. A lot of it was a social program, the social agenda. It was a government self-stimulus package. They created over 30,000 or so structural jobs going forward that are now part of our permanent structural bill every year. We have, my opponents signed on to three largest deficits. We don't have a budget this year, but they're $1 trillion deficits for the last 3 years. We are in trouble in this country, and the only reason we don't get it is because we're a reserve currency and there's still people buying our debt, and we still paying 42 or so cents of every dollar we tax to service that debt. That's also unsustainable. I'm happy to answer questions. I hope that gives you a general idea. I was in, if I seem a little wary, I'm really not, but I was in New York City last night. So I made a speech at the Hyatt Regency to a group called the Monday Night Club, which is a bunch of bankers and economists, and it was kind of interesting. And drove home, took a shower, and drove here this morning. So I apologize if I'm not perfect, but I'm really grateful to be here. One of the disadvantages you have as a non-incumbent, a challenger if you like, is that people don't show up when you go someplace. It's just pretty much the way it is. And if you're a congressman, you kind of show up and people crowd around you. So it's a lot more difficult meeting. So I'm grateful for you to show up and be here with me today. I've been in Cortland many times. I was in the Brockway. I came down here to look at the Brockway trucks, which I've actually owned. I have 10,000 hours on heavy equipment, 25 years in the operating engineers, so I know about work. I was raised on a small farm in Summers on my grandmother's farm in Herkimer in New York. So I have a real fundamental knowledge of how life works and how to take care of yourself, how to take care of your family. Does anybody have any questions?
Well, I do. I'll start. How are you describing the differences between you and Congressman Arcuri, who is probably more moderate than a number of the members, but nonetheless does have a voting record with the leadership in Congress? How do you explain the differences between the two?
Let me just start with the premise that he's more moderate. Mr. Arcuri is more moderate because of me. He was 98.3, and everybody who ran with me last time, he was 97.3% Nancy Pelosi's agenda. He's on the Rules Committee, which is also called, what used to be called the Speakers Committee. He is virtually lockstep with the leadership. And I think that once he beat Ray Meyer, frankly, he had figured out that he would never have another, and this was it. He was on and he went to fast track to being a congressman for 25 years, 24. And he was wrong. There are still people out there who can challenge, and people like me who are not afraid, who looked at his record and realized that he did not represent this community. So what's he doing now? He's out there, he created this moderate party because the independent party knows he's not independent. He is rebranding himself, which incidentally, for a guy who voted for the House bill and then inexplicably voted against the Senate bill, says that the Senate bill, to his liberal friends, he says the Senate bill didn't go far enough, but to other people he says, well, the Senate bill was too expensive. None of that matters. How you vote matters. Why you vote also matters. Your lives, the 614,000 or so people in this district, deserve principled representation. They deserve to have their congressman go to Washington, come back here and say, this is how I voted and this is why. And that should involve a principle that's constant. And a man who represents you, not represents his desire to be reelected. This is not a job I'm doing because I need a paycheck. This is a job I'm doing because I don't expect to live long enough for my kids to have kids. But I would like to do something that leaves a legacy that they can look back on, and they still can, no matter whether I'm successful or not. But for me to be proud of, for them to be proud of,